They doubted her. Singers laughed at a simple woman at the audition, judging her plain gray dress and nervous demeanor, but when Elellanar picked up that vintage microphone and opened her mouth, her first note silenced the room. No one expected what happened next. Elellanar. Ellie. Jenkins closed her classroom door with a sigh, her fingers lingering on the worn brass handle. Another day of teaching third graders at Pine Creek Elementary was complete. The hallways, usually filled with children's laughter, now echoed with emptiness as late afternoon sunlight streamed through tall windows. She made her way to her desk, reflexively straightening the jar of pencils and stack of papers waiting to be graded. But instead of sitting down, she opened the bottom drawer and pulled out a worn newspaper clipping. "Last call for contestants," the headline announced. "Heartland Melody Competition this Friday. Winter Records demo at Sunshine Studios." Ellie traced the words with her fingertip, her heart racing. She'd clipped it 3 weeks ago, but hadn't found the courage to act until yesterday, when she'd finally submitted her application online. "You're being ridiculous," she whispered to herself. "What are you trying to prove?" At 34, Ellie had spent her life playing it safe. The daughter of practical parents who valued stability above all, she'd followed the expected path. College, teaching degree, and 12 years in the same small-town school. Her modest apartment, sensible car, and quiet life were exactly what everyone expected of her. But there had always been another Elellanar, one who sang while washing dishes, who harmonized with the radio driving home, who felt most alive when music flowed through her. "You have her gift," her grandmother had told her years ago, pressing a faded silk scarf into her hands. "My mama sang like an angel too, but those weren't times for colored women to chase spotlights." The scarf, once belonging to Ellie's great-grandmother, was now carefully folded in her purse, a talisman for courage. Her cell phone buzzed. It was Martha, the only colleague who knew about her audition. "You're not backing out, are you?" the text read. Ellie's thumbs hovered over the screen. It would be so easy to cancel, to retreat to the safety of what she knew. Nashville was only a 40-minute drive, but it might as well be another planet compared to Pine Creek. The competition would be filled with experienced singers, people who hadn't hidden their talents in classrooms and church choirs. "No," she typed back. "I gave my word." That was true, but not the whole truth. She'd promised her grandmother on her deathbed 6 months ago that she would stop hiding that voice. The memory still brought tears to her eyes. Ellie tucked the clipping into her bag and left the classroom, walking through the school's empty corridors. Outside, summer heat welcomed her, the air heavy with honeysuckle and anticipation. At home, she stood before her closet, pushing aside bright teacher clothes for something appropriate for an audition. Her fingers stopped on a simple gray button-down dress, plain but neat, with a modest cut that fell just below her knees. Not flashy, but comfortable. Like her. She slipped it on, twisting to see herself in the mirror. The woman who stared back looked ordinary. Dark skin framed by shoulder-length curls pulled back in a simple ponytail. Minimal makeup, sensible, flat shoes. Nothing about her screamed star quality. "Just breathe," she told her reflection. "They can only say no." But as she reached for her purse, her hand trembled. It wasn't just rejection she feared. It was the possibility that her grandmother had been wrong, that the talent she thought she possessed was merely average, forgettable. Ellie pulled out the silk scarf, wrapping it around her wrist like a bracelet. Then, before doubt could paralyze her again, she grabbed her car keys and headed for the door. Nashville awaited, and with it, a reckoning with the voice she'd kept hidden for far too long. The Melody Hall. The Melody Hall in downtown Nashville stood like a faded monument to country music's golden era. Once a premier venue for rising stars, the Art Deco building now hosted local events, wrestling matches, and the occasional talent competition. But to Ellie, approaching on foot from the distant parking lot where she'd managed to find a space, it looked as intimidating as the Grand Ole Opry. A line of contestants snaked around the building, mostly young women in flashy outfits, makeup perfectly applied, hair styled to perfection. Many carried guitar cases or custom garment bags. They chatted among themselves with the easy familiarity of people who'd done this many times before. Ellie took her place at the end of the line, clutching her registration confirmation. She felt conspicuously underdressed in her simple gray dress, especially when the two women ahead of her turned to assess her. "First time?" asked the taller one, a blonde with an elaborate updo and sparkling earrings that caught the light. Ellie nodded, attempting a smile. "Is it that obvious?" The women exchanged knowing glances. "Honey, everyone starts somewhere," said the second, adjusting her rhinestone-studded denim jacket. "I'm Tammy, and this is Becky. We're with the Nashville Nightingales." "Oh, nice to meet you." "I'm Elellanar. Ellie." "What's your specialty, Ellie?" Tammy asked, looking her up and down. "I don't really have one. I just sing." Another exchange of glances, this time with barely concealed amusement. "Well, good luck," Becky said, turning back around. The line inched forward, and Ellie felt increasingly out of place. Inside, the hall was a flurry of activity. Volunteers directed contestants to registration tables, while sound technicians adjusted equipment on the stage. The air buzzed with nervous energy and the competing sounds of vocal warm-ups. At the registration desk, a harried woman handed Ellie a numbered badge. "Contestant 43, waiting areas backstage through those doors. You'll be called when it's your turn." Ellie pinned the badge to her dress and made her way through the crowd toward the waiting area. Backstage was a chaotic mess of performers practicing scales, applying last-minute makeup, or staring at their phones. She found an empty folding chair in the corner and sat down, closing her eyes to center herself. "You can do this," she whispered. "Talking to yourself already? That's not a good sign." Ellie opened her eyes to find Tammy, Becky, and 3 other glamorously dressed women standing before her. They were all part of the Nashville Nightingales, Tammy explained, a local group that performed at corporate events and weddings. "What song are you doing?" asked a redhead with perfect curls. "Somewhere Over the Rainbow," Ellie replied, immediately regretting her choice as the women struggled to hide their smirks. "Isn't that sweet?" said Becky. "Very traditional." The auditions began, and one by one singers were called to the stage. Ellie watched on a small monitor as contestants performed before a panel of 3 judges and a small audience of friends, family, and other competitors. Some were talented, others painfully average, but all had a confidence that Ellie envied. The Nightingales performed as a group, their harmonies polished, if somewhat predictable. They received enthusiastic applause and encouraging comments from the judges. As contestant 43 drew nearer, Ellie's mouth went dry. She unwrapped the scarf from her wrist and held it tightly, remembering her grandmother's words. "When you're scared, just close your eyes and sing like you're alone with God. The rest takes care of itself." "Contestant 43, Elellanar Jenkins," called a production assistant. Standing on shaky legs, Ellie followed him toward the stage. Behind her, she heard one of the Nightingales whisper, "This should be interesting," followed by poorly stifled laughter. Taking a deep breath, Ellie stepped into the bright lights, toward the vintage microphone standing center stage, and into the unknown. The center stage. The stage lights blinded Ellie momentarily as she made her way to the center. Unlike the confident strides of previous contestants, her steps were measured, cautious. The vintage microphone stood waiting, silver and imposing against the dark backdrop. From the wings, the stifled laughter of the nightingales grew more apparent as she took position. In the front rows, other contestants watched with expressions ranging from boredom to amusement. No one expected much from the plain woman in the gray dress. The head judge, a silver-haired man in a Western-style blazer, glanced up from his notes. "Elellanar Jenkins," he asked, peering over half-moon glasses. "Yes, sir. Though I go by Ellie." "Well, Ellie, what will you be singing for us today?" "Somewhere over the rainbow," she replied, her voice barely audible. A few snickers rippled through the audience. It was such a predictable choice. Safe, overdone, the musical equivalent of vanilla ice cream. "And what's your background in music?" asked the female judge to his right, a former country singer with carefully preserved beauty. I don't have formal training," Ellie admitted. "I sing in my church choir and for my students." "You're a teacher?" the woman asked, seemingly surprised. "Third grade, yes, at Pine Creek Elementary." More whispers. This wasn't just an amateur. This was a school teacher from some small town no one had heard of. The third judge, a young man with a carefully trimmed beard, didn't even look up from his phone. "Well then," said the head judge with a practiced smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Whenever you're ready." Ellie gripped the microphone stand, feeling its cool metal against her palms. The backing track would start with her cue. She closed her eyes briefly, touching the scarf at her wrist. In the audience, she could see the nightingales had taken seats in the second row. Tammy leaned over to whisper something to Becky, and both women struggled to contain their laughter. Around them, other contestants were already dismissing her, some checking their phones or whispering among themselves. No one was paying attention. No one expected anything worth hearing. A sharp pain lodged in Ellie's chest. This feeling was familiar, being overlooked, underestimated, dismissed before she'd even had a chance. It had happened throughout her life. At school, auditions, in college choruses, even when volunteering to sing solos at church events. People heard elementary school teacher and pictured someone singing off-key children's songs, not someone with a gift. Her grandmother's voice echoed in her mind. "Baby, people will always try to put you in a box they understand. Your job isn't to fit in that box, it's to break it wide open." Ellie straightened her spine and lifted her chin slightly. She wouldn't let them see her doubt, her fear. "Miss Jenkins, we're waiting," the head judge prompted, his impatience evident. "I'm ready," she said, her voice steadier now. She signaled to the technician in the sound booth. The gentle introduction began, piano notes floating through the air like delicate bubbles. In that moment, she noticed something that almost broke her resolve. Becky had her phone raised, clearly ready to record what she anticipated would be an embarrassing performance. Two other nightingales were covering their mouths, shoulders shaking with suppressed laughter. The music reached her cue point. Ellie took a deep breath. This was it. Years of singing only for herself, for her students, for her small church congregation had led to this moment on this stage. Her hands trembled slightly, but her resolve strengthened. Let them laugh, she thought. Let them judge. And then, Elellanar Jenkins opened her mouth to sing. The performance. The first note emerged, pure and crystal clear, floating like a shaft of sunlight through stained glass. Ellie's voice, a dramatic soprano with remarkable richness, filled the hall with an immediate, commanding presence that seemed impossible coming from her small frame. Somewhere over the rainbow. The phone in Becky's hand lowered slowly as her jaw dropped. The smirks vanished from the nightingales' faces, replaced by wide-eyed disbelief. Throughout the audience, heads snapped up. Conversations ceased mid-sentence. Ellie soared through the first verse with a control and depth that transformed the familiar song. Her voice possessed a rare quality, powerful yet vulnerable, technically perfect yet emotionally raw. The vibrato at the end of each phrase quivered like a living thing. The third judge finally looked up from his phone, eyebrows disappearing beneath his hairline. The female judge sat straighter, leaning forward as if drawn by an invisible force. The head judge removed his glasses, polishing them absently as he listened with newfound attention. If happy little bluebirds fly beyond the rainbow, why, oh, why can't I? As Ellie reached the climactic notes, her voice expanded to its full capacity, revealing a breathtaking 3-octave range. The final note hung in the air, sustained with impossible control, before gently dissolving into silence. For 3 heartbeats, the room remained absolutely still. Then, like a dam breaking, applause erupted. Not the polite, obligatory kind given to average performers, but genuine, startled appreciation. Several people rose to their feet, including the female judge, who was blinking rapidly, her professional composure momentarily forgotten. Tammy's mouth remained open in a perfect O. Becky stared at her phone, seemingly confused that she'd stopped recording. The other nightingales exchanged stunned glances, their earlier mockery transformed into something closer to shame. "Miss Jenkins," the head judge said, clearing his throat. "That was unexpected." "Extraordinary is the word you're looking for, Carl," the female judge corrected, still standing. "Where have you been hiding that voice, honey?" Ellie, slightly dazed by the response, adjusted the microphone. "Teaching multiplication tables mostly," she answered with a small smile. This drew appreciative laughter from the audience, breaking the tension. "Have you had classical training?" the young judge asked, leaning forward. "No, sir. My grandmother taught me to sing, and I learned by listening. Lots of listening." "That's a dramatic soprano range," the female judge noted. "With coloratura capabilities I haven't heard outside of professional opera. You don't hear that kind of voice in contemporary music very often." Ellie touched the scarf at her wrist. "My great-grandmother was an opera singer before women like her were allowed on those stages." "My grandmother said I inherited her voice." The head judge made a note on his paper. "Well, Miss Jenkins, I think I speak for all of us when I say we'd like to hear more. Do you have another song prepared?" She hadn't expected to be asked for a second performance. Contestants were supposed to do one song and leave. Yes, I could sing Amazing Grace," she offered. "Please do," said the female judge, settling back into her seat expectantly. As Ellie prepared for her second song, she noticed the nightingales conferring in hushed whispers. Tammy caught her eye and gave a small, respectful nod. Acknowledgement from one singer to another. The backing track began, but the head judge raised his hand. "Actually, Miss Jenkins, would you sing this one a cappella? I'd like to hear your voice without accompaniment." Ellie nodded, closed her eyes, and began to sing once more. This time, with nothing to hide behind, her voice revealed its true glory, a natural instrument of remarkable power and beauty that seemed to come from somewhere beyond herself. And in that moment, everyone in the Melody Hall understood they were witnessing something rare, talent in its purest form, finally breaking free. When Ellie finished her a cappella rendition of Amazing Grace, the silence that followed felt sacred. She opened her eyes to find several audience members wiping tears away. The young judge was scribbling furiously on his notepad. The female judge simply nodded as if words were inadequate. "Thank you, Miss Jenkins," the head judge said finally, his voice gentler than before. "That will be all for now." Ellie curtsied slightly, an instinctive, old-fashioned gesture that somehow suited the moment, and walked off stage. Her legs felt oddly disconnected from her body, as if she were floating rather than walking. Backstage, the atmosphere had transformed. Contestants who had previously ignored her now watched her pass with newfound interest. A young man with a guitar nodded respectfully. A woman in a sequined dress whispered, "That was beautiful," as Ellie passed. She found her way back to her folding chair, sat down, and released a shaky breath. The reality of what had just happened was beginning to sink in. "Here," said a voice beside her. It was one of the production assistants, offering a bottle of water. "That was something else," he added with a genuine smile. "Thank you," Ellie replied, taking a grateful sip. A shadow fell across her. Looking up, she found the 5 Nashville Nightingales standing in a semicircle around her chair, their expressions a complex mixture of admiration and embarrassment. "So," Tammy began awkwardly, shifting her weight from one foot to another. "That was incredible." Ellie wasn't sure how to respond. These were the same women who had been laughing at her minutes ago. Becky stepped forward, her cheeks flushed. "I want to apologize," she said, surprising Ellie with her directness. I was really rude to you." "We all were," added the redhead, looking genuinely contrite. "We judged you before you even sang a note." Ellie smiled gently. "It's okay. I'm used to being underestimated." "That's the thing," said Tammy, shaking her head. "You shouldn't be used to it. Not with a voice like that." For the next 10 minutes, the Nightingales peppered Ellie with questions. How long she'd been singing. Why she'd never pursued it professionally. Whether she'd considered classical training. The conversation was interrupted when a producer called the next group of contestants to stand by. "We have to go," Tammy said. "But listen, we should talk after this is all over." As the competition continued, word of Ellie's performance spread through the hall. Audience members who had stepped out for breaks returned to their seats, curious about the teacher with the extraordinary voice. Judges could be seen conferring in hushed tones between acts. From her spot backstage, Ellie watched the remaining performances on the monitor. Some were quite good, including a teenage boy with an impressive country baritone and a woman who performed an original composition with passion. But Ellie noticed that the judges seemed distracted, their attention only partially engaged. 2 hours later, all contestants were called back to the stage for the announcement of the finalists. Ellie stood in the back row, her heart pounding as the head judge approached the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've heard some fine talent today," he began. "But our competition rules state that we can select only 5 finalists to return for tomorrow's championship round." He unfolded a piece of paper. "Our finalists, in no particular order, are Jason McCoy, Selena Washington, the Nashville Nightingales." The Nightingales squealed and hugged each other. "Dylan Foster and—" Ellie held her breath, fingers tightening around her grandmother's scarf. "Elellanar Jenkins." A wave of applause swept through the hall, noticeably louder than for the other finalists. Several people stood. Ellie felt rooted to the spot until someone gently pushed her forward to join the other finalists at the front of the stage. Standing under the lights, beside performers who looked like they belonged there, Ellie finally allowed herself to believe that perhaps she belonged there too. The final performance. The following evening, Ellie stood backstage at the Melody Hall Championship round, hardly recognizing her own reflection in the mirror. After her semi-final performance, Martha had driven to Nashville with a dress she'd insisted Ellie borrow, a simple but elegant deep blue gown that complemented her skin tone perfectly. Her hair was styled in loose curls, and she'd allowed herself slightly more makeup than usual, But the most striking change wasn't external. It was the way she carried herself, shoulders back, chin lifted, eyes bright with a newfound confidence. 5 minutes, Miss Jenkins, a stagehand called. Ellie nodded, touching her grandmother's scarf, now folded and tucked into her bodice, close to her heart. She would be the final performer of the evening, a position usually reserved for the strongest contestant. The Nightingales had already performed, delivering a polished set that earned enthusiastic applause. They had sought her out afterward, wishing her good luck with genuine warmth. The transformation in their attitude still amazed her. "You're going to bring the house down?" Tammy had said, squeezing her hand. Through the monitor, Ellie watched Dylan Foster finish his performance. The young country singer had real talent, his original song drawing a standing ovation from a portion of the audience. Then it was her turn. As she walked onto the stage, Ellie was struck by how different it felt from the previous day. The fear was gone, replaced by a quiet certainty. The audience, much larger tonight, hushed as she approached the microphone. "Good evening," she said, her voice steady. "For my final performance, I'd like to sing a song that's special to me. My grandmother used to sing it when I was a little girl. She always said that someday I'd sing it for people who needed to hear it." The pianist began the gentle introduction to Bridge Over Troubled Water. Ellie closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and sang. From the first note, the connection with the audience was palpable. Her voice, powerful yet intimate, filled every corner of the hall with its warmth and clarity. She sang with her entire soul exposed, allowing the music to flow through her without reservation. When she reached the climactic final verse, her voice soared to heights that seemed to lift the entire room. People in the audience were openly crying, mesmerized by the raw emotion she conveyed. As the final note faded, there was a moment of profound silence, that magical space between the end of great art and the world's response to it. Then the audience erupted, rising to their feet in a unanimous standing ovation that continued for nearly 2 minutes. Even the judges stood, the female judge wiping tears from her cheeks without embarrassment. When the applause finally subsided, the head judge spoke, his voice thick with emotion. "Miss Jenkins, in 30 years of judging these competitions, I have never, and I mean never, been so moved by a performance. You don't just sing notes, you sing truth." After all finalists returned to the stage, the announcement came as no surprise to anyone in the hall. Elellanar Jenkins had won the Heartland Melody Competition by unanimous decision. As she accepted the modest trophy and certificate for a recording session at Sunshine Studios, Ellie thought about the journey that had brought her here, from singing quietly in her classroom to standing on this stage, finally recognized for a gift she'd hidden for too long. Later, as reporters from local media asked for interviews and fellow contestants sought her out to offer congratulations, Ellie found a quiet moment to step outside. Under the Nashville night sky, she unwrapped her grandmother's scarf and held it to her heart. "I did it, Grandma," she whispered to the stars. "I stopped hiding." Tomorrow she would return to her students and her classroom, but not as the same Ellie Jenkins who had left. Something fundamental had shifted. A door long closed had finally opened, revealing possibilities she was now brave enough to explore. The voice she'd kept silent for so many years had finally found its song. If this story touched your heart, remember that talent comes in all forms, often hidden behind quiet exteriors. Perhaps you've underestimated someone, or even yourself. Let Ellie's journey remind us all that it's never too late to step into the spotlight and share your gifts with the world. Have you ever witnessed someone being unfairly judged who later proved everyone wrong? Share your experience in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe for more powerful stories that remind us to look beyond appearances. From all of us here, Thank you for watching. Until next time, remember, the most beautiful songs often come from the most unexpected voices.